Some murders shock a city, others shake the whole country. It was a quiet summer morning in Moscow, July 31st, 1997. The kind of morning that lulls people into a false sense of safety. Kids played in courtyards, old men smoked on benches, mothers pushed strollers over cracked pavement. And somewhere between the stillness and the sun, death was already on its way. For the officers of Moscow's 5th Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, it was just another routine patrol, nothing special. The same drill every day. Senior Sergeant Yevgeny Novoderzhsky, Sergeant Viktor Demidov, and their captain, Yuri Shabilkin. 3 men in a gray UAZ van, armored and alert, but not expecting war. They were childhood friends, small-town guys from Pavlovsky Posad. Yevgeny and Yuri had married sisters. They'd served together for years, built a rhythm, like musicians in a band. That rhythm would be shattered in under 15 minutes. At 11 a.m., their radio crackled. Suspicious activity. Goncharnaya Street, Building 38. Just another call. Most of them were false alarms, tripped sensors, nervous civilians. A flicker of tension maybe, but never real fear. Not yet, but this time, it was real. A businessman, an Indian national, part owner of a firm called Orbital, had just witnessed something strange. A dark foreign car parked across the alley. Men inside, eyes too calm, too patient. A moment later, a UAZ minibus pulled up and handed off large plastic bags. 5 men followed him into the building. His instincts screamed. He called the office from a nearby payphone, got no answer, then called Eero 2. All he could say, in broken Russian, was, "Maybe robbery. Goncharnaya 38. Then he vanished. The Orbital office wasn't high profile. No signage, no guards. But inside, something was going terribly wrong. These weren't amateurs. They were the Mozhayev gang, one of the most ruthless and coordinated criminal groups operating in Russia in the 90s. Their MO was precise. Move fast, take hostages, kill witnesses. Always armed, always ready to shoot their way out. That morning, they were staging another daylight robbery, and they weren't planning on being interrupted. But fate had other plans. So did the 3 officers. Shabilkin's team arrived within minutes, along with a backup car from the nearby 37th precinct. 2 officers, Nikitin and Koklachov, joined them. As protocol dictated, Captain Shabilkin gave orders. Nikitin, Koklachov, and Demidov would enter through the basement. Novoderzhsky would circle the building, checking for escape routes. They didn't know what waited behind those doors. The street was calm. A quiet courtyard. No signs of panic. Mothers chatting. Seniors soaking in sunlight. The calm before the massacre. Inside, the Orbital security guard was already unconscious, knocked out cold with a blow to the face. The staff were cowering, hands trembling. The robbers were gathering valuables, stuffing bags. They moved like a unit, focused, mechanical, lethal. When they heard a knock on the back door, they hesitated, not in fear, but calculation. Could be cops. They herded the hostages toward the main exit, tried to escape through the building's front entrance, but it was locked, coded. Time slipped away. Each second they spent fumbling was one step closer to confrontation. And then, one slip. A dropped box, a sharp clatter, loud enough to be heard behind the door. The officers knew someone was inside. Captain Shabilkin requested confirmation over the radio. Novoderzhsky circled the building again. Everything was adding up. This was real, not a false alarm. Still, no one fired. The officers knew they had civilians behind that door. Inside, Mozhayev and his men grabbed hostages. Human shields. They weren't bluffing. One man was dragged toward the exit, screaming. The door opened. The hallway was face to face with law enforcement. Nikitin tried reasoning. Don't move. Don't do anything stupid. Too late. The first shot tore through Nikitin's chest. He dropped instantly. Blood pooled on the concrete. Koklachov was hit in the arm, but kept shooting, crawling up the stairs. Behind him, chaos exploded. From around the corner, Novodersky saw it all unfold. Shibilkin shoved Koklachov out of the doorway, then slammed it shut, trapping himself between the gang and the courtyard. Seconds later, gunfire shattered the stillness of the street. Screams, smoke, panic. A bullet hit Galina Yakovenko, an investigator from 37th Precinct, sitting in a nearby patrol car. Another officer, Mamadev, radioed for help. It would arrive too late. Inside, Demidov fought for his life. A hostage collapsed on him in fear. Demidov pushed him aside and tried to aim, but couldn't risk hitting the innocent. The gang took Nikitin's rifle. Now they had even more firepower. Shibilkin was pinned against the door. Mozhayev fired blind through the gap, aiming at police cars, the street, anyone. Civilians ran in every direction. One round hit the patrol vehicle. Shibilkin fired back, silenced the gun for a moment. Novodersky gave the signal. "Fall back. I'll cover you." He didn't know those would be his last words to his friend. Shibilkin hesitated, and in that hesitation, a burst of fire. The bullet ripped into him before he could move. He collapsed at the door, blood soaking his uniform. The gang burst out of the building like wolves, firing wildly, taking Koklachov hostage. Novodersky tried to hold his position, retreating slowly, waiting for an opening. He didn't expect them to shoot Koklachov point-blank in the head. Another cop dead. Demidov, still in the hallway, chased the fleeing attackers. One escaped through the courtyard. Mamadev shot one, but missed the second. A young woman darted into the line of fire at the last moment. The gunman vanished into the alley. Novodersky held his ground. Reinforcements arrived. Shots fired from both sides. Ponomaryov, a young sergeant, joined the firefight, catching Mozhayev's rifle with a lucky shot, jamming it. Mozhayev grabbed a backup pistol, but his hand was wounded. He couldn't chamber a round. He ran. Demidov called an ambulance. Novodersky tried to stop the bleeding. Yakovenko lay wounded. 3 officers were dead. The gang's leader flagged down a car in a side street, pretending to be the victim of a robbery. The driver believed him, drove him home, even helped patch him up. No one knew he'd just murdered 3 police officers in broad daylight, but Moscow would know soon enough. Mozhayev wouldn't get far. Within weeks, a multinational task force tracked him to Ukraine. On August 19th, he was arrested by Russian and Ukrainian forces in a coordinated raid. He confessed to everything. Posthumously, the state awarded medals. Sergeant Viktor Demidov, Medal of Valor. Senior Sergeant Yevgeny Novodersky, Order of Courage. Fallen heroes, Yuri Nikitin, Alexander Koklachov. Captain Yuri Shibilkin died in hospital 4 days later. They were buried with honor. Their patrol van replaced. A new commander assigned, and the patrols resumed, but the scars stayed. Because some battles never end, some ghosts never leave, and some names, like Mozhayev, remind you that even in broad daylight, monsters walk free, until someone stops them. In the days that followed the Goncharnaya Street bloodbath, Moscow teetered on the edge of panic. The headlines were unforgiving. 3 police officers dead, 1 severely wounded, a gang escape in broad daylight. But the headlines didn't capture the real fear. They didn't capture the way the city flinched at every siren, or how silence on the streets felt heavier than gunfire. Yevgeny Novodersky hadn't slept since that morning. He sat alone in his apartment, blinds drawn, uniform draped over a chair, speckled with Shibilkin's blood. His fingers trembled as he reached for a cigarette, only to put it down again. He kept replaying the shootout in loops, the thump of boots on stairs, the shriek of ricocheting bullets, Yuri's last breath. His best friend, his brother-in-law, his commander, gone, ripped from existence in a matter of seconds. The trauma hadn't just marked him, it infected him. Novodersky stopped shaving, stopped eating. His phone rang for days. He didn't answer, not even when the department called. Grief rooted itself in his chest like ice, but the memories burned like fire. Back at the 5th Department, grief settled like smog. Officers moved like shadows. No banter, no idle gossip, no music over the radio. Just the dull clatter of typewriters, the shuffling of boots, and the hiss of stale coffee. Bureaucracy tried to sanitize the bloodshed. Evidence logged, statements recorded, ballistics compared. But none of it felt real. The air was heavier, the building colder. The funeral was bitter, not just from the biting wind. Hundreds gathered, officers from every district, standing shoulder to shoulder in ironed uniforms and heavy boots. No eulogies, just silence. Shibilkin's coffin, flanked by an honor guard, moved slowly between rows of grieving men. Novodorozhsky stood stiff beside Demidov and Mamadev, unmoving. When the coffin lowered into the earth, a gust of wind hit the trees, sharp, snapping, and everyone flinched. It sounded like gunfire. That very night, the ministry launched a full-scale operation. This wasn't just a manhunt, it was a public performance. They needed control, justice, revenge. High-ranking officers were pulled off other assignments. Profilers brought in from military intelligence. Surveillance teams were deployed across Moscow. Old case files were reopened. Maps of the city were riddled with red pins. Safe houses, arms dealers, informants, and ghosts from old wars. The goal was simple: find Yuri Mozhayev. Mozhayev wasn't just a gang leader. He was an ex-military strategist, trained in guerrilla warfare during the First Chechen War. He'd seen blood, caused it, survived it. That's what made him different. He didn't steal for greed. He stole for control. Tactical, methodical, remorseless. His crew? Former soldiers, expelled cadets, and ex-cons. Well-armed, disciplined, fanatically loyal. And now he was missing. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd fled to St. Petersburg. Others whispered he'd already left the country. But Novodorozhsky didn't buy it. Mozhayev was a predator, and predators don't run. They stalk. They wait. Though officially placed on leave, Novodorozhsky and Demidov couldn't sit still. Demidov rigged a scanner to listen to all local dispatch calls. He couldn't sleep unless it was buzzing. Novodorozhsky haunted the Goncharnaya Street area at night, sitting in his car with the engine off, watching shadows move behind windows. He whispered Yuri's name like a prayer, and then it came. The break. In Kursk, a cabbie picked up a man with a bandaged arm, paid cash, spoke with a slight military accent. He left behind a receipt, a Moscow pharmacy. That one slip was enough. With cooperation from Ukrainian authorities, the team traced the trail to a farmhouse near Kharkiv, a decaying dacha surrounded by weeds and rusted fencing. Inside, Mozhayev, alone, bandaged, armed, surrounded by relics, worn rifles, faded photos, Soviet medals. On August 19, 1997, before sunrise, a special forces team breached the perimeter. He didn't fight, didn't flinch. He just looked at them and smiled. News broke by noon. Mastermind of Goncharnaya bloodbath captured in Ukraine. But inside the 5th Department, no one clapped, no one cheered. The room stayed as silent as the day they buried Shibilkin. Back in Moscow, Novodorozhsky was driving near the outskirts when the radio crackled. Target secured. Mozhayev is in custody. He pulled over, turned off the ignition, and for the first time in weeks, wept. The interrogation tapes would haunt the task force. Mozhayev spoke like a professor giving a lecture, precise, cold, arrogant. He called the operation a necessary correction. The officers? Collateral. He referred to Shibilkin, Nikitin, and Koklachev as points of resistance neutralized. He described the shootout in clinical terms, like dissecting a body. No remorse, no regret. Moscow was buzzing. Talk shows, tabloids, headlines. But inside the precinct, the silence remained. Galina Yakovenko was still in a hospital bed, half paralyzed. Demidov visited Shibilkin's widow every Sunday. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit. No words, just presence. A silent solidarity. In March 1998, medals were distributed. Posthumous honors, orders of courage, speeches by men in suits who hadn't stepped foot on Goncharnaya. Novodorozhsky received one too. He kept it in a drawer beneath his socks, never spoke of it. He considered it a consolation prize for failure. And life inevitably continued. Patrols resumed, rosters filled. The 5th Department trained new recruits. But something had changed. The men walked a little slower, talked a little quieter. Doors stayed closed longer. And every night, when the radios crackled and boots hit pavement, they listened for something else, a phantom echo. Because once you've heard that kind of gunfire, you never stop listening for it again. Moscow, spring 1998. Snow had melted into oily puddles. Street lamps blinked over cracked pavement. Crime was still a fixture, an undercurrent to the city's rhythm. But in the 5th Department, the tone had shifted. Something was broken. Not visibly, not in the reports or the quotas, but in the air, in the unspoken moments between patrol calls. Yevgeny Novodorozhsky had returned to duty. His uniform fit tighter around his shoulders, as if the fabric carried the weight of what he'd seen. He barely spoke. Officers noticed. Some respected it. Others tiptoed around it. Only Demidov still called him Genya without hesitation. And only Demidov knew how often Novodorozhsky still woke at night, drenched in sweat, gripping an invisible rifle. The precinct had a new commander now. Lieutenant Colonel Streltsov, clean-cut, precise, a man of procedure. He respected bravery, but he worshipped protocol. He made it clear. What happened on Goncharnaya was a tragedy, yes, but it would not define the department. He wanted order, control, predictability. It didn't sit well with Novodorozhsky or with Demidov. You can't box chaos. You can't predict when a man like Mozhayev crawls out of the gutter with military discipline and no soul. They knew that. They'd lived it. Streltsov hadn't. On April 12th, a robbery in the Orakovo-Borisovo district sent ripples through the force. A jewelry store hit with surgical precision. No alarms tripped. Cameras disabled. Guards knocked out with a nerve agent. The MO didn't fit the typical Moscow crew. It was cleaner, sharper. Ex-military again, maybe. Streltsov dismissed it as a one-off. Professional thieves, nothing more. Novodorozhsky wasn't so sure. The residue on the doorknobs matched military-grade compounds used in Spetsnaz training. The guard's breathing had been suppressed, not choked, rendered unconscious, clean, professional, controlled. A name emerged in a whisper: Viktor Yaga Sobolev, former demolitions expert. Discharged in '90, went underground, rumored to have joined Mozhayev's circle briefly before vanishing in '92. The thing about ghosts? Once you know they're real, you start seeing them everywhere. Novodorozhsky asked for permission to investigate. Streltsov refused. We have procedures, channels. Let the detectives handle it. So Novodorozhsky worked off the clock. He and Demidov tracked Yaga's name through the underworld. A card game in Sokolniki, a black market arms deal in Chertonovo, a burned-out flat in Mariino. Always one step behind. But the trail was warm. Someone was planning something. Something bigger than jewelry, bigger than cash. On May 3rd, a train shipment of Kalashnikovs disappeared en route from a military depot near Tula. Manifest forged. Guards gagged but unharmed. The whole container vanished. Now the ministry cared. Streltsov called an emergency briefing. We are dealing with a new cell, possibly former Mozhayev operatives. We cannot allow another Goncharnaya. Novodorozhsky didn't speak. He just stared at the map. Red pins were multiplying. By May 9th, intel suggested an arms drop was scheduled to move through Moscow. Destination unknown. The force scrambled resources. Checkpoints lit up. Radio chatter buzzed like hornets. Tension rose. Demidov found a name, an informant in Lyublino. Street name, Shershin. Former driver for Mozhayev's crew. Claimed he knew the buyer. Claimed it was bigger than anything they'd seen before. They arranged a meet in a mechanic's garage. May 11th. Rain slicked the concrete. Novodersky and Demidov arrived early, weapons concealed, nerves taut. Shershin showed up late, sweating, looking over his shoulder. "They're moving it tonight," he said. "Not guns, launchers, RPGs, maybe more." "Who's buying?" "Not who, where, Chechnya. Grozny needs firepower, and someone's delivering it from your backyard." Novodersky felt it in his bones. This wasn't just a crew. This was a war economy, rebuilding itself with blood. But before Shershin could say more, a shot cracked the air. His skull split open. Sniper. Demidov dove. Novodersky fired into the rain, hitting nothing. Chaos erupted. Tires squealed outside. The shooter vanished. Streltsov shut the case, called it a failed drug bust, said the informant had ties to heroin traffickers, ordered all files sealed. But the precinct buzzed. Everyone knew something was coming. And Novodersky couldn't shake the feeling that Goncharnaya was only the beginning. Because ghosts don't die, they regroup. And the city had just started to whisper again. May 1998. Moscow was breathing faster, shallower. Not the breath of panic, but the tense inhale before a fight. The Goncharnaya massacre still haunted the 5th Department, but now there was something else, something colder. The feeling that something massive was moving under their feet, and they were just catching vibrations. Yevgeny Novodersky had stopped asking permission. Every conversation with Streltsov ended in tension, so he just stopped reporting what he was doing after hours. He and Demidov had created their own system, a board hidden behind an old map of Moscow, pushpins in strange places, photos tacked with red string, unofficial witness statements, anonymous tips scribbled on napkins. At the center of the board, a word in red ink: transfer. The death of Shershin hadn't been just a message. It was a rupture. Everything they'd uncovered about the missing arms, the Chechen buyer, and the mysterious ex-military logistics was disappearing in real time. Witnesses vanished, locations burned, phones went dead. But Yevgeny trusted patterns, and one thing was clear. The weapon transfers followed military discipline, same time windows, same distances between drops, same level of precision. That meant a network, and every network has a hub. They found it in an unlikely place, a decommissioned textile factory in Elektrostal, an hour outside the city. Officially abandoned. In reality, rewired with satellite dishes, heat signatures, and electrical use peaking after midnight. Novodersky didn't need confirmation. He could feel it. This was their ghost market. On May 20th, they surveilled it from a ridge. Through binoculars, Demidov spotted men moving crates from a van. No markings. But the way they moved, tight formation, no wasted steps. They weren't smugglers. They were soldiers. Or had been. "This isn't black market," Demidov muttered. "This is gray military." 2 days later, they brought the evidence to an old contact in military counterintelligence, Colonel Aslanov. Gruff, blunt, mostly retired. He stared at the photos, then at Novodersky. "You're in over your pay grade," he said, "but you're not wrong." Aslanov confirmed the obvious. Some units from the dissolved Soviet war machine had gone freelance. Warehouses untouched since the collapse were now in private hands. And some buyers, especially from the North Caucasus, were willing to pay in diamonds, oil, or favors. He leaned closer. But this isn't just selling weapons. It's staging, positioning. Someone's preparing for something. By May 27th, everything accelerated. A warehouse in Krasnogorsk exploded. Officially, a gas leak. Unofficially, a failed demo. Satellite photos showed crates before the blast. Metal tubes, long. Missiles? Demidov asked. Or launchers, Novodersky replied. Or worse. They knew they needed to act, but Streltsov blocked every move. "You're chasing shadows," he said in his office, gesturing to their latest report. "Moscow is not a battlefield." Yevgeny stared back, voice low. "It will be." He was suspended the next day. Demidov wasn't. He stayed inside, passed intel to Novodersky by burner phone, kept watch on patrol chatter, listened to whispers. June 1st. A robbery in Izmailovo turned bloody. Guards executed with surgical shots to the temple, loot ignored. Instead, blueprints were stolen, layout plans for military warehouses. 2 days later, a rail inspector near Ryazan was found dead, his logbook missing. He'd been tracking unscheduled rail cars. Some of those cars were heading north. Something was moving, something that didn't want to be seen. And then it happened. June 4th, 03:47 a.m. A train derailed outside Klin. Military responders sealed the site within minutes. But Novodersky had gotten the frequency of their encrypted channel weeks earlier. He was already listening. Cargo breached, Unit 4 compromised, 1 survivor, extraction priority. He grabbed his keys and drove. No sirens, no lights. By 05:50, he was at the edge of the forest near the crash. Military trucks roared past him on the road. He slipped into the trees, boots silent in the underbrush. Smoke still curled above the trees. What he saw stopped him cold. The cargo wasn't weapons. Not exactly. It was components, guidance systems, electronics, fragments of what looked like cruise missiles. Experimental tech. Stuff that didn't officially exist. Stuff that could change a war. And in the mud, near the wreckage, he found a body. Not military, civilian. ID in his pocket. Armenian name, known broker in arms deals, shot in the back. This wasn't just a weapons transfer. This was an operation with layers. He backed out before the soldiers saw him. The next day, Novodersky met Demidov at a quiet church courtyard. Told him everything. Showed him the GPS images, the ID, the charred schematics. Demidov rubbed his face. "So who's running it now? Mozhayev's in custody. Is this his legacy?" Yevgeny shook his head. "No, it's bigger, organized, international. He was just the start." They looked at the city skyline. Moscow was waking up. Neon signs flickering, trams humming, the illusion of peace. But beneath it, war. Not declared, not televised, but engineered, piece by piece, crate by crate. And the ghosts? They weren't whispering anymore. They were marching. June 5th, 1998, Moscow. Dawn broke not with warmth, but with static. Something in the air, like voltage. The kind that made dogs bark at shadows and birds scatter for no reason. Yevgeny Novodersky hadn't slept. Not really. He was running on black coffee and paranoia. The night before, he had driven out of Klin with mud on his boots and contraband in his trunk. 2 scorched microchips, 1 damaged infrared lens, and a shredded folder stuffed into a waterproof sleeve. It was what the military missed at the derailment site, or pretended to miss. Demidov met him in a boiler room of an abandoned school, their new safe spot. He spread the gear out on a rusted desk. Demidov stared. "What the hell are we looking at?" "Guidance tech, missile brains. Someone's building a Frankenstein arsenal, not junk, precision stuff, experimental." Demidov swallowed. "This is war grade." "It's not just that," Yevgeny added. He handed over the shredded folder. Inside, a partially intact map, northern Russia, overlay of rail routes, some circled in red. Demidov ran his finger along one line. "This heads to Severodvinsk, naval base." Yevgeny nodded. "And here, a ghost depot, not on any map after '92, closed by decree, but still using power, still guarded." They knew what it meant. Someone inside the military or ex-military was trying to bring the Soviet machine back online piece by piece. They had no badge, no backup, just instincts and a car running on fumes. So they drove north. 10 hours later, in a village outside Velsk, they found the first clue. A bribe-weary rail operator named Misha, who hadn't been paid in months, but was suddenly flush with cash. He talked. He was afraid, but he talked. The trains come every Friday after 2 a.m. No manifest, just a code. UR7, always the same. 4 cars, covered, escorted. Escorted by whom? Misha laughed bitterly. Guys who don't wear insignia, but they stand like they've drilled parade squares. Demidov leaned forward. What's UR7? I asked once. They told me it means utilization resource. Scrap, but it isn't. It hums, Misha whispered. You can hear it, even when it's not moving. That night, Yevgeny and Demidov set up in the forest near the tracks. 2:11 a.m. The train arrived, silent, heavy, escorted by 3 unmarked jeeps, men in black fatigues with NVGs, the kind not issued to regular troops. They watched one car unload. It wasn't scrap. Crates marked with strange Cyrillic codes, symbols from aviation engineering, Cold War relics made modern. And inside one, they caught a glimpse of a warhead casing. Jesus Christ, Demidov breathed. This isn't just black market, Yevgeny whispered. This is resurrection. June 9th, back in Moscow, they approached Colonel Aslanov again, this time with proof. Aslanov paced, agitated, chain-smoking. I warned you this went deep, he said, but this is treason. He agreed to make one call, just one, to someone in the Presidential Security Service. By June 10th, the safe house was raided. Novodersky and Demidov escaped by seconds, burned the maps, split up, new phones, no names. It was real. They were being hunted. By June 12th, they had one chance left. Leak it. Not to the press. They'd get buried. But to a man in Geneva, a weapons inspector turned private analyst, known to pay for credible intel. They sent him photos, coordinates, testimony, everything. 2 days later, the Geneva man vanished. They realized the circle was wider than Russia. It was multinational. On June 15th, they met one last time. Park bench, Gorky Park, broad daylight, families all around. Demidov handed Yevgeny a flash drive. If I disappear, send this to Aslanov. Tell him to go public. Yevgeny stared at him. You're not going anywhere. But he did. That night, Demidov's apartment burned. No survivors. No cause found. The next morning, Yevgeny stood alone at the edge of the city, watching freight cars roll by, listening to a world that no longer made sense. The Mozhayev case was closed. But the machine, it had restarted. And the ghosts? Now they wore uniforms again. Don't scroll past. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready for the next twisted story.